Good evening, welcome to our Gita webinar tonight. My name is Swami Devarshi. Let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswarji, beloved Guru, Paramhansa Yoganandaji, saints of all religions, we humbly bow at thy feet. Beloved Lord, guide us with your deep wisdom, with your inspiration, with your divine love. Help us to be like you, always acting in Dharma and righteousness, with all of our actions, guiding us towards freedom. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Well, this evening with the Bhagavad Gita, we're in chapter 17, and we're in stanzas 7 to 13 tonight, which is about the three ways and different levels of food and also yagya, almsgiving, and ceremonies. Chapter 17, stanzas 7, 8, 9, and 10. Even the taste for food is variously sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic. So also the preferred types of yagya, or sacrifice, the penances, and the ways of almsgiving. Hear these distinctions. Foods that promote longevity, vitality, endurance, health, a cheerful attitude, and a good appetite, that are pleasant tasting, mildly flavored, nourishing, and agreeable to the body. Such foods give sattvic enjoyment and are preferred by sattvic people. Foods that are bitter, sour, heavily salted, excessively hot, pungent, sharp tasting, and burning give rajasic enjoyment and are those preferred by people of rajasic temperament. Such foods produce pain, discomfort, and disease. Foods that are nutritionally worthless, tasteless, putrid, stale, thrown away as garbage, or otherwise impure, give tamasic enjoyment and are preferred by tamasic people. Now, this guidance on food in some ways is, I wouldn't say it's rigid, but it's very clearly defined: sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic foods. Also, you could say the way that we enjoy foods, and I'll touch on that a little bit. I'm going to talk about how the great master Paramhansa Yoganandaji and his disciple Swami Kriyanandaji interpreted these teachings on food. Food, interestingly, I think for many yogis and renunciates who give up a lot in life in the search for truth, in the search for God, very often food is the one thing that's left that they can enjoy, because most of us have to partake of food. One time Swami Kriyanandaji, who enjoyed food, was sort of bemoaning this fact with his guru, Yoganandaji. And he told him, "Oh, sir, what about my attachment to food and to good food, tasty food?" And Yoganandaji just smiled and he said, "These are little things." He said, "When ecstasy comes, everything goes, all these little attachments." And so yogis can go in the other direction of being very fanatical about food. I think in my 40 years of living with other Kriya yogis, people who are renouncing and really avidly seeking God, I think I have probably seen the most fanaticism revolving around food. Because again, it is the one last sense pleasure in a way that most people have to partake of, because most people need food to survive. And so there tend to be a lot of likes and dislikes and just a lot of fanaticism around food. First of all, Yoganandaji, in talking and interpreting the Gita, he says that Krishna is talking about the spiritual qualities of food. and not the chemical properties alone. That said, healthy food has a balance of different nutrients and chemical properties, which I'll get into. But the spiritual qualities of food are also very important. Yoganandaji actually went through a lot of the various foods that are common, fruits and vegetables. And he attributed and tuned into very specific qualities that different foods had. And for example, coconut, he said, is purely spiritual quality. Lettuce, he said, taking in of lettuce produces calmness in the soul. And so each of these different fruits and vegetables actually have a spiritual quality that we can tune into. I don't recall where Yoganandaji talked about this. I think one of the books that Ananda Sangha sells about health and vitality, based on Yoganandaji's own words, might get into this. But again, spiritual qualities of foods are very significant and relevant. So everything has vibration. Also keep in mind that the manner that food is cooked and prepared also imbues vibration into the food. This is why it's so important, if you have a cook, that the cook is of a somewhat good consciousness. If someone cooks with a lot of anger or restlessness or desire and attachment, those vibrations go into the food. I think this is why sometimes going to a restaurant, you might enjoy the taste of the food and the flavor of it and how well it's prepared, but maybe when you get home you feel heavy, or you feel a certain quality that's not good. Or vice versa. It could be that the cook in the restaurant is a saintly soul and you feel uplifted after eating certain food. And so the way that food is cooked is very, very important. I always appreciated and enjoyed watching Swami Kriyanandaji's cook of many years. Her name was Leela. And she, when you walked through the kitchen and she was cooking, there was a really profoundly uplifting consciousness that she had when she was preparing food for Swamiji. And at all times, but especially in the kitchen. There was a divine sweetness, and I could see why Swamiji had her as the cook, because he was taking in food every day, which he had to do, and along with it he was taking in uplifting vibrations. So sattvic food tends to calm the mind. Sattvic food is easier for a yogi to partake in and to be able to meditate more easily. Yoganandaji especially recommended fruits, vegetables as sattvic, especially either raw or lightly cooked. And I'll get into some of these things here in a few minutes. Rajasic foods are more stimulating and energizing. They're not always bad. Sometimes we need some stimulation, especially in a world that is very rajasic. If we just have entirely sattvic and indrawing foods, and we work in a very busy and intense office environment, it may be counterproductive actually. We may need some energizing foods, stimulating foods, just to get us up to speed and to get more in tune with that wavelength of energy. I was very struck in my very first year at Ananda Village. This was 1977. And those of us who were taking part in the Karma Yoga program there, we had a picnic. And Swami Kriyanandaji was invited to the picnic. And the cook made vegetarian burgers as part of this picnic. It's very traditional. In America at picnics you have hot dogs and hamburgers, but we had vegetarian versions of those. And the cook had a lot of fun with it because he had two varieties of burgers. One he called sattva burgers, and the other ones he called rajo burgers. And the rajo burgers had onions and garlic and were a little bit more spicy. And he, with a lot of joy, gave everyone the option of one or the other. And I was intrigued by what Swami Kriyanandaji would take, because here was a great yogi and a great example for me. And I noted that he took the rajo burgers, and he did it with laughter. He was not too serious about these things. But he did say at times that in this busy, intense world that we're in, sometimes some stimulating foods are good. Now you will also hear some yogis forbid disciples from taking onions and garlic and anything stimulating. Yoganandaji tended to be a little bit more balanced about such things. And again, I'll talk more about this. Sattvic foods also are whole grains, dairy products, nuts, natural sweets, lightly cooked foods. Rajasic foods can be things like onions and garlic and spicy, salted foods, which, I think Indians enjoy spicy foods. I do too. I very much enjoy very hot spices sometimes. At times over the last many years in my garden at Ananda, I've grown these Thai hot peppers that are extremely hot. And again, I think we just have to be balanced. Sri Yukteswarji, Yoganandaji's guru, brought it all into balance when he said that we should find a diet that is suitable to our own constitution and needs and stick with that diet. And he was against fanaticism, long fasts and things like that. He was about balance, and he was not rigid or defined in you must eat these foods, you must not eat those foods. Tamasic foods are meats, especially. These are animals that are slaughtered, and again, talking about consciousness. That animals, when they are killed, they tend to have a lot of fear in them when they're being killed, and at that moment of death, that fear, not only does it have a vibration, but it also introduces chemicals in the body, adrenaline and different things. And this is why meat-eating people, meat-eating nations, tend to be more aggressive and warlike and maybe more fear-based. People who are vegetarians can tend to be more calm and more peace-loving and peaceful. So food really has a great effect on consciousness. Now, all this coming back to finding balance. Yoganandaji said, make God, not food, your religion. And nowadays, I think there are a lot of people who are making food their religion. And you just see so many extreme views of foods to the point where just every day you read something online if you follow the internet as your guru, which I've seen the internet makes a very poor guru, because there's so much that is either fanatical or untrue. But just every day you'll find something, if you look, about some food that you like and is healthy, and you'll see an article that says this food is actually bad for you. And you probably could not eat anything if you were to follow the advice of the internet. But what Yoganandaji was saying, he was saying, don't depend on food alone for strength and health. He said, he gave the analogy of someone who said, oh, I feel weak because I didn't have my avocado today, and my spine feels weak and I'm tired. And Yoganandaji says we need to put out willpower and energy, and to be able to rise above limitations caused by not being able to eat the foods that we are used to eating. That said, one should try to have a healthy diet and try to have a balanced diet. So, getting into fanaticism with food. Yoganandaji was not even 100% with his disciples, urging them even to be a vegetarian. I'm going to read how he put it. He said, to my first generation of students in America, which was entirely a meat-eating country at that time, the master said, I didn't say much about a vegetarian diet. It was too unusual then for the people in this country. Diet was secondary in importance anyway to the teachings of yoga. For the next generation, I recommended that they eat less meat. Most of them, on average, became healthier. For this third generation, I've recommended a completely vegetarian diet and find that of the three groups, the present one is the most healthy. I don't care much, however, for that word, vegetarian. Too many people are fanatics on the subject. I've coined what I consider a better word, proper-etarian. And so, Yoganandaji was not into labels and these things, but even with meat eating, there's a very interesting story of his first disciple in America, Dr. Lewis, who was a meat eater, just like everybody was in 1920 in America. And he followed the Guru's advice to eat less and less meat until finally he stopped eating meat altogether. And this was after a couple of decades of being a disciple, he was starting to have a few health issues. And Yoganandaji, with his omniscience and awareness, tuned into the needs of Dr. Lewis. And he realized that Dr. Lewis actually needed to be eating just a little bit of meat on occasion to balance something inside of himself. I don't know what it was. And in fact, he ate some meat on the Guru's advice, just occasionally, not a lot. and he found that these health issues went away. So there's not one rule for everybody. And again, it's good not to be fanatical about these things. Now there's also a social consciousness and awareness for not eating meat. This is really what got me into vegetarianism at a very young age. I was about 17 years old. I was still living at home with my family, and I said finally one day, I'm not eating meat anymore, and I stopped eating meat. And it was partly because I had a love for animals, and I did not appreciate killing defenseless, kind creatures just so I could eat them. And I also felt that there was a heaviness to meat. And for me it was very easy and natural, and it could have been from past lifetimes of being a vegetarian. That said, I've never been fanatical about it, and I've never told others that they should not eat meat. Nowadays, with the population explosion in the world, animals and meat eating do take a lot of natural resources, much more than eating vegetables and the like. So there's also a more environmental good reason for not eating meat. But again, there's no reason to be fanatical about it. Now, again, along those lines of fanaticism, one of the sayings attributed to Jesus Christ, I've always appreciated whenever I hear somebody getting fanatical about food. Jesus said, what comes out of a person's mouth is more important than what goes into their mouth. In other words, what they say is more important than what they eat. And by extension, really, who they are and what they are, their consciousness is more important than merely the food that they put into their mouth. So, in terms of diet, Yoganandaji recommended simple diet. He recommended fruits and vegetables predominantly. He said for a person in good health, the day's diet should be approximately 60% fruits and vegetables, 20% protein, and 20% starches and sugars, which you'll find that actually is quite far away from normal diet, I think, that's commonly accepted in both India and America, from what I've seen. 60% fruits and vegetables, 20% protein, 20% starches and sugars. And even with the fruits and vegetables, Yoganandaji and his guru recommended either raw predominantly or lightly cooked, if you have cooked vegetables, rather than overly cooked vegetables, because there is more life force in those things. I've noticed as a gardener of many years and growing a lot of vegetables, I found that very fresh vegetables have a lot of prana and a lot of life force in them, to the point that when I've had a garden and I have a salad from my garden, I will actually, in years past, will go home for lunch and pick my salad from the garden and eat it within 10 or 15 minutes, because I find that it has much more life force. And you can really feel it and taste it and feel it in your own body when you do that. So, diet, work in a direction, see it as a direction, don't see it as an absolute. I have one friend, Kriya Yogi here, who I was talking to him about 3-4 months ago. He said that for many, many years, he was a meat eater. He lives here in India, he's an Indian. He was a meat eater, and he was always trying to cut back on the meat, and he just couldn't. He just found that he needed it, or he felt he needed to eat meat regularly. And then he started practicing Kriya Yoga. And he said within 2 years of practicing Kriya Yoga, the desire to have meat by itself naturally fell away. And he had no compulsion or desire anymore, and he stopped eating meat altogether. What happened is that his consciousness changed. And we see this with people who practice Kriya Yoga over time, that desires, attachments for things that maybe aren't completely uplifting naturally fall away of themselves, because as the consciousness is uplifted, one sees these other things in a completely different light, and something like meat becomes distasteful rather than something that is an idea that we're told that it's not good, and so we try to push it away even though we're still drawn to it. So balance, and also see it as a direction. Yoganandaji also said that eggs and dairy are fine for people who, especially who don't eat meat, and that they're good and healthy. And again, Krishna in Gita talks about eggs as being in the Rajasic field. But for protein, it's a good practice. In Yoganandaji, many of his recipes included eggs. I know that for certain cultural reasons or traditional reasons, some people do not eat eggs, and that's fine. But also, on the other side, don't judge those who do eat eggs or who eat meat. Now, talking about the next step, which is practicing almsgiving ceremonies, which are also of three types: sattvic, rajasic, tamasic. Chapter 17, 11th stanza, Krishna says that yagya, sacrificial rite or performance of duty, is sattvic, which is offered without any desire for personal gain from the deed, which is performed in accordance with the teaching of Scripture and with firm belief in its rightness. Yagya performed with the hope of reward, O best of the Bharatas, Arjuna, and in a spirit of ostentation is rajasic. That yagya, finally, is declared tamasic, which is not motivated by regard for scriptural injunctions, makes no suitable gifts of food or money, is performed without the offering of sacred chants or prayers, and is without devotion to God. So these are the three types of offerings. Sattvic offering has no desire or thought of self. It's only entirely about giving to the Lord, giving to others. This is the highest way to God in some ways, because it is the most direct, quickest, and easiest way to lose the self in the larger self, is to learn how to give at all times without any thought of what is coming back to us. Rajasic offerings are done with the thought, I'm doing this offering to the temple because I'm going to get some good karma out of it. And so in a way that's selfish. It does get some good karma to give, but what is good karma in the end? It maybe helps us to get more money or more of this or that. But the sattvic offering, it transcends good karma altogether and helps us to become liberated. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Rituals that are done purely to glorify the self or without devotion, these are tamasic. There was a sect in the Jewish times, in the Old Testament, and when Christ came along. And this sect, whenever they were giving money or making donations to the temple, there would be people who would blow the trumpets and make a lot of noise and make a lot of proclamation that this person was giving so much, and they would make a big show of it. And Christ said very simply about these people, he said, "Verily, verily, they too shall have their reward." And he said it with a little bit of bite to it, because he was saying that their reward was going to be more outward, in the same way that their giving was more for show. And so the deeper reward comes from true self-offering and the deepest devotion without asking anything in return. Now, Swami Kriyanandaji adds another fine-tuned sort of four categories of self-offering in religious tradition. The sattvic one is purely done with an awareness of God and that God can be realized. People, as he puts it in these traditions, revere the saints and revere saintliness and divine qualities in others. Then he says under rajas, he says there's a combination of sattva, rajas, and then there's pure rajas. Sattva, rajasic people have a tendency for very ethical behavior, moral behavior, right action, but without the thought of God. And so this is one step on the way to divine freedom. So it's not a put down to say that. It is a coming down if someone comes from a high degree of devotion to God and then they come down to this level. Swamiji himself gave a very good analogy about behavior. He said that if Mahatma Gandhiji went from being someone who performed right action and selflessness for the country of India, if he instead, in the middle of that, had decided to become a banker and make a lot of money, he said that would have been a big step down, and that would have been a very wrong action. But Swamiji points out that if somebody is very tamasic, is very lazy, they don't put out any energy, and then one day they wake up and they decide that they want to become a banker and make a lot of money. And I'm not speaking against the bankers here. Banking can be very right action. So if you are in the banking world, which I actually worked at a bank one time many, many years ago when I was a teenager, I'm not speaking against bankers and banking. But Swamiji said if a very lazy person decides to become a banker or a businessman and make a lot of money, that's actually a very good thing for him to do, because it goes from tamasic to rajasic level. So these are all not just levels, but also you can see them as directions. And so it's actually, if you are advising someone in your family or a friend who's tamasic, for those people it might actually be unhelpful for some people just to go from that degree of sloth and laziness into meditation. They may need to have that interim step of putting out a lot of energy in a rajasic kind of way. And so the people who are pure rajasic, again, have no desire for God and just more for outward action and some degree of self-involvement and reward. And then Swamiji also says that truly pure rajasic, even divine worship, tends to be very outward and emotional and with much display. This could be emotional displays of jumping up and down and being very restless while singing to God without any sense of calmness and inwardness. And again, for some people, that might be a direction upwards. For others, it might be a direction downwards. And tamasic traditions, you might think religion could not have tamasic traditions, but in fact, there are, which tends to be more towards black magic and sorcery and voodoo and all these things, and using, incantations and the like to harm others, which is very, very tamasic. So in the end, those who understand these things in the highest understand that it's not about just developing good karma, which is not the reason why the yogi, the saint, or the master worships God. It is entirely, again, without any thought of self, which is just to give ourselves completely to the Lord, and in that complete, free giving, to merge back into the infinite. I'll just tell a very short part of one of the most beautiful stories along these lines. And it's a particular version of the story of Karna in Mahabharata. In this particular version of the story, when he was near death on the battlefield, it is said that he had enough good karma that he could not die. And so Krishna took on the guise of a beggar and went to Karna and started asking, give me this and give me this. And Karna was known as the most generous-hearted giver of all. He could not refuse anyone who asked anything of him. And to make a long story short and to cut to the end, because we're running out of time, Krishna finally asked Karna, give me all of your good karma, give me your punya, everything that you've earned in the past, give that to me. And Karna could not refuse, and he gladly, freely, willingly gave that to this beggar, who he did not know it was the Lord, it was just a beggar to him. And he gave it freely and completely, and then the Lord appeared to him in his full glory, which he only appeared to a couple of people in that whole epic, including Arjuna. And he appeared to him, and Karna saw this, and Krishna said to him, now I will give you a boon. Whatever you ask, I will give to you because of your generosity. And it's so beautiful and inspiring and telling that the only boon he asked, imagine yourself in this situation, you would ask for liberation maybe, freedom, something for yourself. But how interesting that Karna only asks that in his next lifetime, that if anyone ever asked anything of him, he would freely give it again, and he would hold nothing back. This, even though his giving in this lifetime as karma had caused him great loss and great pain. Yet he wanted to always give freely and not think of himself. And at that point, the Lord said, granted him that boon, but also said, and you don't have to come back and incarnate again because you are free. And so that act of freely giving to the Lord everything that we have, it does more than just give us good karma or a boon. It actually liberates us. This is how we become free and achieve moksha, is through the act of complete, selfless, unconditional giving. And this yagya and ceremonies that Krishna is talking about really can be seen as all of life. Our seva, our giving to our family, our giving especially in meditation. Swami Kriyanandaji said that every time we even practice Kriya Yoga, which is a technique that is based on an action, and in a way is a yagya or a ceremony, he said every Kriya should be an act of devotional self-offering. And again, that type of offering where we are not asking for anything for ourselves, but just giving ourselves completely to the Lord as we bring the energy up the spine to the altar of spirit here at the spiritual eye. And when we practice that every morning and evening, day in, day out, throughout the course of a lifetime, we become liberated and free because the ego is completely dissolved in the giving of ourselves completely to the Lord. And we achieve final union, yoga, union, samadhi bliss with this merging with God. And this is the highest yagya, the highest ceremony, the highest action, which is to give to God completely, freely, and with the deepest devotion. This is the way to freedom that Krishna gives us in the Bhagavad Gita. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.